Thomas Mitchell stared at the old Victorian house through the windshield of his rental car. 20 years had passed since he'd last seen it. The peeling white paint, the wraparound porch with its sagging steps, the oak tree in the front yard now twice as tall as he remembered. Rain pattered against the roof as he sat there, postponing the inevitable. He hadn't planned to come back to Oak Ridge, not after everything that happened. But when the lawyer called about his father's will, something pulled him home to this small Connecticut town where everyone knew everyone's business. It's just a few days, he told himself, turning off the engine. Sign the papers, sell the house, and leave. The front door opened before he reached it. His sister, Claire, stood in the doorway, arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her blonde hair was shorter now, streaked with premature gray, and the lines around her eyes had deepened. But her gaze, that penetrating, judgmental stare, hadn't changed a bit. "You're late," she said flatly. "Nice to see you too, Claire." Thomas hefted his duffel bag onto his shoulder and stepped inside, the familiar smell of wood polish and old books washing over him. The house looked smaller than he remembered. Family photos still hung in the hallway. His mother, smiling on her wedding day, Claire's high school graduation, Thomas in his baseball uniform. His father had kept them all, even after Thomas left. "I made up your old room," Claire said, walking toward the kitchen. "Dad's service is tomorrow at 3. Pastor Willis is handling it." Thomas nodded, though she couldn't see him. "How many people are coming?" "Half the town, probably. Unlike you, Dad had friends here." The barb stung, but Thomas let it go. "When's Ellie getting in?" Claire turned, surprise flashing across her face. "You still remember our little sister's name? That's something, I guess." "Jesus, Claire, can we not do this right now?" "Do what?" "Point out that you disappeared for 20 years? That you didn't even come home when Mom died." Her voice cracked slightly. "That Dad waited every holiday, hoping you'd call." Thomas set his bag down harder than he meant to. "You have no idea why I left. Because you couldn't handle responsibility. Because running away was easier than facing consequences." "That's not what happened." "Then what did happen, Thomas?" "Because from where I stood, my brother abandoned his family when they needed him most." Thomas felt the old anger rising in his chest. The same feelings that had driven him away in the first place. "I'm going to unpack," he muttered, grabbing his bag and heading for the stairs. "Ellie's flight gets in at 7, Claire called after him. "At least try to be here when she arrives." His old bedroom was exactly as he'd left it. Baseball trophies on the shelf, faded posters on the walls, the twin bed with its blue plaid comforter. His father hadn't changed a thing, as if keeping the room intact might somehow bring his son back home. Thomas sat heavily on the edge of the bed, pulling out his phone. 3 missed calls from his ex-wife, probably about child support for a son he barely knew. An email from his boss wondering when he'd be back. Nothing from anyone who actually cared how he was doing. He opened his wallet and removed a worn photograph. Him and his dad fishing at Lake Meredith, both smiling, Thomas proudly holding up a smallmouth bass. He was 12 in the picture, before everything went wrong. Before the accident that changed everything. A car door slammed outside, pulling Thomas from his thoughts. He moved to the window and saw a taxi driving away, leaving a young woman standing in the rain, looking up at the house. Even from a distance, he recognized Ellie, the baby sister who'd been only 8 when he left home. She was grown now, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing a professional-looking coat and dragging a rolling suitcase behind her. She hesitated at the bottom of the steps, as if gathering courage, before making her way to the front door. Thomas heard Claire's greeting, their quiet voices drifting up the stairs. He should go down, face this reunion head-on. But something kept him rooted to the spot. Shame, maybe, or fear of what he'd see in Ellie's eyes. He'd missed her entire adolescence. Missed her high school graduation, her college years. According to Claire's Christmas cards, the only connection he'd maintained with his family. Ellie was a journalist now, working for some newspaper in Boston. The stairs creaked, and Thomas tensed. A soft knock on his door followed. "Thomas." Ellie's voice, deeper than he remembered. "Can I come in?" He took a deep breath, steeling himself. "Yeah, it's open." The door swung inward, and there she was, his little sister, all grown up. Her eyes, so like their mother's, studied him carefully. "Hey, Elle," he said, his voice catching. "You got tall." A smile flickered across her face. "That happens in 20 years. The awkward silence that followed felt like a physical weight. What do you say to someone you've hurt so deeply? What words could possibly bridge that kind of gap? I'm sorry about Dad, Thomas finally offered. Ellie nodded, leaning against the doorframe. He asked about you. At the end, Thomas looked away, unable to bear the gentleness in her voice. I should have come sooner. Yes, she agreed simply. You should have. Another silence, heavy with unspoken accusations and explanations. Claire's making dinner, Ellie said. We need to talk about the will. All three of us. Thomas nodded. I'll be down in a minute. After she left, Thomas returned to the window, watching the rain intensify. Beyond the yard, he could just make out the steeple of the church where they'd bury his father tomorrow, where he'd have to face not just his sisters, but everyone else he'd left behind. The truth would come out eventually. It always did in small towns. And when it did, Thomas knew the fragile piece of this homecoming would shatter completely. Dinner was a quiet affair. Claire had prepared their father's favorite pot roast, a gesture Thomas found oddly touching. They ate mostly in silence, the clink of silverware against plates punctuated by Ellie's occasional attempts at conversation. She asked about Thomas's job in Chicago, commercial real estate development, a career that kept him conveniently busy and far from Oak Ridge. He answered with minimal details, aware of Claire's scrutinizing gaze. Dad kept all your newspaper articles, Claire told Ellie, clearly preferring to ignore Thomas's presence. He had a scrapbook. It's in his study if you want it. Ellie smiled sadly. He called every time something of mine was published, even the small pieces. He was proud of you, Claire said. Of both of us. The implication hung in the air. Not Thomas. Never Thomas, not after what happened. After dinner, they gathered in their father's study, a room that smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather, though William Mitchell had quit smoking years ago. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with the legal texts from his days as the town's most respected attorney. His reading glasses still sat on the desk, as if he might return any moment to claim them. Mr. Harrington dropped this off yesterday, Claire said, removing an envelope from the desk drawer. Dad's will. He said we should review it together before the formal reading tomorrow. Thomas accepted the document, trying to ignore the tremor in his hands. He'd told himself he didn't care what his father left him. He'd made his own money, built his own life. But sitting here in the heart of his childhood home, surrounded by memories, he found himself hoping for some sign that his father had forgiven him. The first pages were standard legal language. Distribution of assets, payment of debts. But when Thomas reached the specific bequests, he froze. What? Claire asked, noticing his expression. What does it say? The house, Thomas said, his voice tight. He left the house to all three of us. Jointly. Claire snatched the paper from his hands. That's impossible. He promised. She stopped, scanning the text frantically. This can't be right. What did he promise? Ellie asked. Claire's cheeks flushed. That I would get the house. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who took care of him when he got sick. And you're getting a third, just like us, Thomas said. I don't want a third. I want what he promised me. Claire's voice rose. I gave up everything for him. My marriage fell apart because I was always here, taking care of Dad while you two lived your lives elsewhere. Ellie reached for her sister's hand. Claire, we didn't know. Of course you didn't. Nobody ever asked. Claire pulled away, pacing the room. And now he wants us to share the house? How exactly is that supposed to work? Thomas lives in Chicago. You're in Boston. Am I supposed to buy you both out? With what money? Thomas continued reading. There's more. He left his savings to be divided equally. And the cabin at the lake. Don't even say it, Claire warned. He left it to me. Thomas finished, surprise evident in his voice. The cabin at Lake Meredith had been their summer getaway growing up. Their mother had loved it there. It was where they'd scattered her ashes after cancer took her. After everything you did, he still left you the cabin. Claire's laugh was bitter. Perfect. I don't understand, Thomas said, genuinely confused. Why would he do that? Because he never stopped hoping you'd come home, Ellie said quietly. He told me once that the lake was where you were happiest, where you were most yourself. Well, I don't want it, Thomas said, setting the will down. You can have it, Claire. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. I'm just saying, you always do this, Claire interrupted. Swoop in, make grand gestures, then disappear again. You can't fix 20 years of absence with one moment of generosity, Thomas. The room fell silent. Outside, thunder rumbled, and rain lashed against the windows. There's a letter, Ellie said suddenly, pulling another envelope from inside the will. It says we're supposed to read it together. The handwriting was shaky, their father's once precise penmanship diminished by age and illness, but still recognizable. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat as Ellie began to read. My dear children, if you're reading this, I've finally found peace. I hope you can find it too, with each other. I've left the house to all three of you because it was always meant to be a home for the entire family. A place to return to. A place to heal. Ellie's voice wavered, but she continued. Claire, my devoted daughter, you sacrificed so much to care for me. More than I had any right to ask. Your strength has been my comfort, but I worry you've put your own life on hold for too long. It's time for you to live for yourself now. Claire turned away, but not before Thomas caught the shine of tears in her eyes. Ellie, my youngest, you've made me so proud. Your determination to seek truth through your writing shows a courage I always admired. Keep asking the difficult questions, but remember to listen to the answers, even when they're not what you expect. Ellie wiped at her cheeks, taking a moment before continuing. And Thomas, my son, the weight you've carried all these years was never yours alone to bear. What happened was an accident, a terrible, tragic accident. I should have told you that every day instead of letting my own grief silence me. The cabin is yours because that's where our best memories live, where we were a family before loss changed us. Thomas felt something break inside him, a dam he'd built long ago to hold back the flood of guilt and regret. I ask only one thing of you three. Spend 1 week together at the house before making any decisions about selling it. Talk to each other. Really talk. There are truths that need to be spoken, and wounds that have festered too long in silence. Ellie folded the letter, her hands trembling slightly. It's signed, with endless love, Dad. No one spoke for several minutes. Thomas stared at the bookshelves, at the framed family photos, happier times that seemed to belong to someone else's life. I can't stay a week, he finally said. I have meetings, clients. Of course you can't, Claire snapped. God forbid you honor Dad's final request. That's not fair. Thomas began, but Ellie cut him off. Stop it, both of you. Dad wanted us to talk, not fight. She looked between her siblings. Whatever happened 20 years ago, it's time we dealt with it. All of us. Nothing happened 20 years ago, Claire said sharply. Thomas got drunk, crashed Dad's car, and nearly killed himself and Jamie Winters. Then he ran away rather than face the consequences. That's not the whole story, Thomas said quietly. Then what is? Ellie demanded. Because I was 8 years old when my brother disappeared from my life. I deserve to know why. Before Thomas could answer, the lights flickered, then went out completely. The storm had knocked out the power. Perfect timing, Claire muttered, fumbling in the darkness. There are candles in the kitchen. As she left to find them, Thomas and Ellie remained in the shadowy study, the rain creating racing patterns on the windows. I was going to tell you both eventually, Thomas said softly. About that night. About Jamie. Tell me now, Ellie said, her voice gentle but insistent. Thomas took a deep breath, preparing to unlock the secret he'd kept for 2 decades. But before he could begin, Claire returned with lit candles, casting long, uncertain shadows across the room. The pastor called, she announced. The river's rising. They might have to postpone the funeral if the cemetery floods. Even in death, it seemed, their father would have to wait for resolution. Just like in life. Morning arrived with relentless sunshine, as if the previous night's storm had never happened. Thomas woke early, disoriented by the familiar ceiling of his childhood bedroom. For a moment, he could almost believe he was 17 again, with his whole life stretching before him, unmarked by tragedy. The illusion shattered when his phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife. Jake's science project is due Monday. Did you send the money yet? Thomas set the phone aside without answering. His 13-year-old son, who he saw twice a year at best, was a walking reminder of his failures as a father. Like son, the family legacy of absence. Downstairs, he found Ellie at the kitchen table, typing on her laptop. She looked up when he entered, offering a tentative smile. Coffee's fresh, she said, gesturing to the pot. Claire went to check on the funeral arrangements. The cemetery didn't flood, thankfully. Thomas poured himself a cup, then hesitated before sitting across from her. About last night. You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, Ellie said. But Dad was right. Whatever happened, it's time we talked about it. Thomas traced the wood grain of the table with his finger. The same table where they'd eaten countless family meals, where his father had helped him with homework, where they'd gathered the night his mother told them her cancer had returned. Jamie Winters wasn't just my friend, he began. He was my boyfriend. Ellie's fingers stilled on her keyboard. Her expression remained carefully neutral, but Thomas could see the surprise in her eyes. No one knew, he continued. Not in Oak Ridge, not in 2003. We kept it secret, met up at the lake cabin when we could. He paused. Dad found out, though. He came to the cabin unexpectedly one weekend and caught us together. What did he do? Ellie asked quietly. Nothing at first. He just left. Didn't say a word. Thomas stared into his coffee. But that night, he told me I needed to straighten out. Said no son of his was going to throw away his future on some phase. He'd been drinking. He drank a lot after Mom died. Thomas swallowed hard, the memories flooding back with unexpected clarity. I was so angry. I took his car keys, thought I'd drive to Jamie's, figure things out. Dad tried to stop me. We fought. He said things. Thomas's voice faltered. Horrible things. About me. About Jamie. And then you crashed, Ellie supplied. Thomas nodded. I was speeding, crying, not paying attention. Went off Hartford Road at the curve by Miller's farm. The car rolled twice. Jamie was in the passenger seat. He wasn't wearing his seatbelt. The kitchen seemed to grow smaller, the air thicker. Thomas forced himself to continue. When I woke up in the hospital, Dad was there. He told me Jamie was in a coma, that his parents were devastated, that I could be charged with reckless driving, maybe worse. The words came faster now, as if rushing to escape after being contained for so long. Then he made me an offer. He'd pay for Jamie's medical bills, make sure the Winters didn't press charges if I agreed to leave town. Go to college far away. Start fresh. He forced you to leave? Ellie's voice was incredulous. Not exactly. He said it was my choice. But he made it clear that if I stayed, there would be questions. About why we were together that night. Where we'd been. Thomas met his sister's gaze. I was 17, terrified, and ashamed. So I took the deal. Ellie reached across the table, her hand covering his. Thomas, I'm so sorry. Don't be. I made the choice. I could have stayed, faced the consequences. He pulled his hand away. Instead, I abandoned Jamie when he needed me most. I never even visited him in the hospital. Did he recover? Jamie. Thomas nodded. Eventually. Dad kept me updated during my first year at Northwestern. Jamie woke up after 3 weeks. Had to relearn how to walk. But he recovered, graduated a year late. And after that, did you ever reach out to him? How could I? What would I say? Sorry I nearly killed you, then disappeared? Thomas laughed bitterly. Besides, Dad made it clear that contacting Jamie wasn't part of our agreement. The back door opened, and Claire entered, looking exhausted. She stopped short when she saw them at the table, tension visible in her shoulders. Funeral's still on for 3, she said, hanging up her coat. Half the roads in town are still blocked from fallen trees, but people will manage. She poured herself coffee, her movements stiff, deliberate. Thomas wondered how much she knew, how much their father had shared with her over the years. We need to talk, Claire, he said. About what? How to divide the silver. Which furniture you want to claim before running back to Chicago. About Jamie Winters. Claire's cup clattered against the counter. What about him? I was just telling Ellie what really happened that night. Why I left. Claire turned slowly, her face pale. Don't. She deserves to know. You both do. I already know, Claire said, her voice tight. Dad told me everything years ago. How he drove you away because he couldn't accept who you were. How he regretted it every day for the rest of his life. Thomas stared at her, stunned. Then why have you been so angry with me? If you knew. Because you never came back. Claire's composure shattered. Dad changed, Thomas. After Mom died, after you left, he was broken. He joined PFLAG. He donated to LGBTQ youth shelters. He tried to find you, to apologize, but you'd already changed your number, your email. I didn't know, Thomas whispered. How could you? You cut us all off completely. Claire wiped angrily at her eyes. And Jamie, do you have any idea what happened to Jamie after you left? Thomas felt a chill. Dad said he recovered. Physically, yes. But he was never the same. He waited for you, Thomas. For years. Even after his parents moved him to Pennsylvania, he kept coming back to Oak Ridge, asking about you. The weight of this revelation pressed down on Thomas like a physical force. I didn't. I thought he'd hate me. He loved you, Claire said simply. And you didn't even say goodbye. Thomas felt dizzy with regret. All these years, he'd convinced himself he was protecting Jamie by staying away. That his absence was a kindness rather than another wound. Where is he now, he asked. Ellie and Claire exchanged a glance. He's here, Ellie said gently. In Oak Ridge. He moved back 5 years ago. He teaches English at the high school. Thomas closed his eyes, imagining Jamie in their old classrooms, teaching teenagers literature and grammar. Living his life just miles from where they'd once made all those teenage promises. He's coming to the funeral, Claire added. He and Dad became close over the years. Dad was like a mentor to him after he decided to become a teacher. The irony was almost too much to bear. While Thomas had been running, building walls around his heart, his father and Jamie had found a way forward together. I can't face him, Thomas said. Not after everything. You have to, Ellie insisted. Not just for Jamie, or for Dad. For yourself. Claire set her coffee down and approached the table. For the first time since Thomas had arrived, her expression held something other than anger, perhaps understanding, or even compassion. Dad's letter said we need to heal, she said quietly. Maybe this is where it starts. Thomas looked between his sisters, these women who had once been the little girls he'd promised to always protect. They'd grown up without him, faced their own struggles, built their own resilience. Yet somehow, they were offering him a bridge back to the family he'd abandoned. I don't know if I can fix this, he admitted. None of us do, Ellie said. But we have to try. Outside, church bells rang in the distance, counting the hours until they would say their final goodbyes to William Mitchell, a man Thomas had spent 20 years resenting, only to discover now that his father had changed, had regretted, had tried to make amends in his own way. And somewhere in Oak Ridge, Jamie Winters was preparing to attend the funeral of the man who had once torn them apart, unaware that Thomas had finally come home. The First Presbyterian Church of Oak Ridge stood as it always had, dignified, imposing, with stained glass windows that transformed the afternoon sunlight into kaleidoscopes of color across the mourners' faces. Thomas sat in the front pew between his sisters, uncomfortably aware of the whispers that had followed him inside. The prodigal son returns. 20 years too late. The church was packed, just as Claire had predicted. William Mitchell had been a fixture in Oak Ridge, attorney, town council member, Little League coach. The faces Thomas recognized had aged, gray hair and wrinkles where youth had once been. Some nodded at him solemnly. Others averted their eyes, as if his absence had made him a stranger, or worse, an intruder. Thomas scanned the crowd, unable to help himself. He'd know Jamie anywhere. That was what he told himself. But 20 years was a long time. People changed. He'd changed. Pastor Willis spoke of William's dedication to the community, his integrity, his generosity. Thomas listened with a growing sense of disconnect. The man being eulogized, a champion of tolerance, a pillar of support, a loving father, bore little resemblance to the bitter, angry man who had driven his son away. William's greatest quality, the pastor was saying, was his capacity for growth. He wasn't afraid to admit when he was wrong, to learn from his mistakes, to become better than he was. Claire reached for Thomas's hand, squeezing it gently. He squeezed back, a silent acknowledgement of the truth in those words. When the service ended, they followed the casket to the cemetery where their mother was buried. The rain had left the ground soft, and Thomas's dress shoes sank slightly with each step. A flock of mourners trailed behind them, a procession of black against the vibrant green of early summer. As they stood by the grave, Thomas finally saw him. Jamie Winters was standing toward the back of the crowd, taller than Thomas remembered, his dark hair now shorter, more conservatively styled. He wore glasses now, wire frames that suited his face. When their eyes met across the gathering, Thomas felt a jolt of recognition, of connection, that 20 years hadn't diminished. Jamie didn't smile, didn't nod. He simply held Thomas's gaze for a long moment before looking away. After the burial, people gathered at the house for the reception. Thomas moved through the rooms in a daze, accepting condolences from neighbors and family friends, many of whom treated him with a cautious politeness that bordered on suspicion. He answered their questions about Chicago with rehearsed responses, deflected inquiries about his long absence, and kept one eye on the door, waiting. "He's not coming," Claire said, appearing at his elbow with a plate of finger sandwiches. Jamie. He texted me that he couldn't make it to the reception. Thomas felt a complicated mix of relief and disappointment. Did he say why? I think seeing you was harder than he expected. Claire offered him the plate. You should eat something. You've barely touched food all day. Thomas took a sandwich without really seeing it. When did you and Jamie become friends? After he moved back to town. We were both on the community theater board. Claire's expression softened slightly. He asked about you. Not directly at first. Just little questions about what you were doing, if you ever mentioned him. What did you tell him? The truth. That we barely heard from you. That you never talked about the past. She brushed a crumb from her black dress. He stopped asking eventually. Across the room, Ellie was deep in conversation with an elderly couple Thomas didn't recognize. She caught his eye and gestured for him to join them, but he shook his head slightly. He couldn't bear any more small talk, any more strained politeness. I need some air, he told Claire, setting down his untouched sandwich. The back porch was mercifully empty. Thomas leaned against the railing, watching the twilight settle over the yard where he'd played as a child. The old tire swing still hung from the oak tree, swaying gently in the evening breeze. I was hoping you'd come out here eventually. Thomas turned, his heart hammering against his ribs. Jamie stood in the doorway, hands in the pockets of his suit pants, looking both familiar and strange. A ghost from his past made flesh. Jamie. Thomas managed, his voice barely audible. Hello, Thomas. Jamie stepped onto the porch, letting the screen door close behind him. It's been a long time. 20 years of imagined conversations, of rehearsed apologies, deserted Thomas completely. He stood frozen, taking in the man before him. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the slight scar above his right eyebrow that hadn't been there before, the cautious way he held himself, as if prepared to retreat at any moment. I thought you weren't coming to the reception, Thomas finally said. I wasn't. Then I realized I'd spent enough time waiting for you. Jamie moved closer, stopping a few feet away. Your father would have appreciated the irony. He spent years trying to get me to confront you, to stop letting the past define my future. He did. Jamie nodded. William became a different person after you left. It took time, but he changed. He helped me when no one else would. He paused, studying Thomas's face. He never forgave himself for what he did to you. To us. I didn't know. Thomas said, the same words he'd spoken to Claire earlier. An inadequate response to years of misunderstanding. How could you? You were gone. There was no accusation in Jamie's voice, just a simple statement of fact. I waited for you, you know. Every day for months after the accident, I expected you to walk into my hospital room. By the time I was strong enough to ask questions, you were already halfway across the country. Thomas gripped the railing behind him, needing its support. I wanted to come see you. Every day? But my father made you choose, Jamie finished for him. I know. William told me everything, years later. A sad smile crossed his face. He was trying to make amends, I think, by telling me the truth, even if it made him look terrible. The revelation that his father had confessed everything to Jamie, had taken responsibility for tearing them apart, left Thomas reeling. All these years, he'd carried the weight of his decision alone, believing Jamie would never know why he'd abandoned him. I should have been stronger, Thomas said. I should have stayed. We were kids, Thomas. Scared kids in a town that wasn't ready for us. Jamie's voice was gentle. I was angry for a long time. But eventually, I realized holding on to that anger was only hurting me. A burst of laughter came from inside the house, a jarring reminder of the people gathered to mourn. Thomas glanced toward the door, then back at Jamie. Can we go somewhere? To talk. Jamie hesitated, then nodded. The diner on Main is still open late. Some things in Oak Ridge never change. As they walked down the porch steps together, Thomas felt a weight lifting. Not completely, not yet, but enough to let him breathe more freely than he had in 20 years. Behind them, the house was full of people celebrating his father's life, unaware that outside, something broken was taking its first tentative steps toward healing. Mel's diner looked exactly as Thomas remembered. The same chrome-edged tables, the same faded Coca-Cola signs on the walls, even the same ancient jukebox in the corner playing Patsy Cline. The only concession to the passage of time was the free Wi-Fi sticker on the door. They sat in a booth near the back, away from the few other late-night customers. The waitress, a woman Thomas didn't recognize, brought coffee without being asked, suggesting some things in Oak Ridge really hadn't changed. "Still take it black?" Jamie asked as Thomas reached for his mug. "You remember that?" "I remember everything." Jamie stirred cream into his own coffee. "First day of ninth grade. You wore a blue shirt with a tear in the sleeve. You sat behind me in English and kept kicking my chair until I turned around. When I finally did, you asked if I had an extra pencil, even though I could see one sticking out of your backpack." Thomas felt his face warm. "I wasn't exactly subtle." "No, you weren't." Jamie smiled, a real smile this time, which made it all the more confusing when you disappeared without a word. The smile faded, and Thomas knew they'd reached the moment he'd been both dreading and needing, the reckoning. "I convinced myself I was protecting you," Thomas said, "that you'd be better off without me around, reminding everyone of the accident, of what we were to each other. That wasn't your decision to make. I know that now." Thomas traced the rim of his coffee mug. "I was a coward, Jamie. I was scared of this town, of my father, of what happened to you because of me. The accident wasn't your fault. We were both upset that night. If anything, I was the one who insisted we take the car, go somewhere, anywhere." Jamie shook his head. "But that's not what I needed to hear from you. I just needed to know that you cared enough to say goodbye." The simple truth of it hit Thomas with unexpected force. He'd spent 20 years constructing elaborate justifications for his absence, when what Jamie had needed most was the most basic courtesy, an explanation, a farewell. "I'm sorry," Thomas said, the words inadequate but necessary. "Not just for leaving, but for making it about me. About my guilt. You deserved better." Jamie nodded slowly, accepting the apology without immediately absolving him. Thomas respected that. The refusal to make this easy, to pretend 2 decades of silence could be erased with a few words. "Your father came to see me in the hospital," Jamie said after a while. "About a month after you left. I was still doing physical therapy, learning to walk again. He sat in that room for hours, just watching me struggle down the hallway with my walker. Then he came back the next day, and the next." Thomas tried to imagine his father, stern, unyielding William Mitchell, keeping vigil at the bedside of the boy he'd once forbidden his son to see. "He never said much at first," Jamie continued. "Just asked if I needed anything, if my parents were taking care of me. Then one day, he told me he'd made a terrible mistake, that he'd driven you away because he was afraid of what people would think, of the life you might have." Jamie looked directly at Thomas. "He said he'd give anything to take it back." Thomas felt a tightness in his throat. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because your father spent the rest of his life trying to make things right. He couldn't reach you, so he tried to help me instead." Jamie's voice was soft. "He paid for my college tuition, helped me get my first teaching job. When I decided to move back to Oak Ridge, he was the one who convinced the school board to hire me, despite everything." The revelation left Thomas speechless. While he'd been nursing his resentment in Chicago, building a life defined by what he'd left behind, his father had been quietly atoning for his mistakes. He changed, Thomas. People can do that. They can learn, grow, become better than they were. Jamie reached across the table, not quite touching Thomas's hand. "I did. Your father did. Maybe you can too." The challenge in those words was gentle but unmistakable. Thomas thought of his son Jake, growing up barely knowing his father, of the relationships he'd sabotaged over the years, afraid to let anyone get too close, of the life he'd built that was successful by every external measure and hollow at its core. "I don't know if I can stay in Oak Ridge," he said honestly. "I'm not asking you to." Jamie withdrew his hand. "But running away didn't fix anything 20 years ago. It won't now either." They fell silent, the ambient sounds of the diner filling the space between them. Coffee being poured, silverware clinking against plates, the muted conversations of other patrons. "Tell me about your life," Thomas said finally. "Are you happy here?" "Teaching." Jamie's expression lightened. "I am. There's something about helping kids find their voice through literature, showing them that words have power." He smiled slightly. "I teach To Kill a Mockingbird every year and still find something new in it." "That was always your favorite book." "Still is." Jamie studied him. "What about you? Are you happy in Chicago?" The question, so simple and yet so rarely asked, caught Thomas off guard. "I'm successful," he answered automatically. "That's not what I asked." Thomas considered the truth. "No," he admitted. "I'm not happy. I haven't been for a long time." The confession hung between them, unexpected in its rawness. I have a son, Thomas continued, surprising himself. Jake. He's 13. I barely know him. He stared into his coffee. I'm doing to him what my father did to me. Different circumstances, same result. It's not too late to change that, Jamie said. Take it from someone who's watched a lot of parents figure things out. Kids are more resilient than we give them credit for. Thomas thought of the cabin at the lake, of his father's will. My father left me our old cabin. I was going to sell it without even seeing it again. Don't. Jamie's response was immediate. That place meant something to us. To your family. What would I do with it? I live in Chicago. Visit. Bring Jake. Create new memories to stand alongside the old ones. Jamie leaned forward. The cabin is still beautiful, Thomas. I drive by it sometimes, on my way to the state park. It's been empty too long. The thought of returning to the lake, of showing Jake the place where he'd once been truly happy, stirred something in Thomas that he'd kept buried for years. Hope, possibility, the chance for something different. When they finally left the diner, the night had deepened around them. They stood in the parking lot, the awkwardness of a conversation ending after so many years unspoken. I should get back to the house, Thomas said. Claire and Ellie will be wondering where I went. Jamie nodded. I have papers to grade tomorrow. End-of-year essays wait for no man, not even for long overdue reunions. Thomas smiled at that. Can I call you? Before I leave town. I'd like that. Jamie pulled out his phone. Give me your number. As they exchanged contact information, a curiously modern coda to their shared history, Thomas felt something settle within him. Not resolution, not yet, but the first step toward it. Good night, Thomas, Jamie said, stepping back. I'm glad you came home, even under these circumstances. So am I, Thomas replied, and was surprised to realize he meant it. He watched Jamie drive away, the taillights of his car disappearing around the corner of Main Street. Then he turned toward his father's house. No, their house now, his and Claire's and Ellie's, wondering if it might, after all these years, become a home again. The week Thomas had promised to stay stretched before him like uncharted territory. With the funeral behind them, the rhythms of grief settled into something quieter, less ceremonial. Claire returned to work at her flower shop downtown, while Ellie set up a temporary office in the dining room, her laptop and notebooks spreading across the antique table as she worked remotely for her newspaper. Thomas found himself at loose ends. He'd told his office he needed 2 weeks for a family emergency, far longer than he'd intended to stay, but now those days yawned open, waiting to be filled. He spent the first morning after the funeral wandering through the house, reacquainting himself with its corners and crannies, the places where memories lurked. His father's study drew him repeatedly. He sat in the leather chair behind the desk, opened drawers that still contained William Mitchell's meticulous files, ran his fingers along book spines that showed evidence of frequent handling. In the bottom drawer, he found a photo album he'd never seen before. Inside were pictures of Thomas throughout his years away, his college graduation, clipped from the Northwestern Alumni magazine, a newspaper photo of him receiving a business award in Chicago, even a grainy printout from his company website. His father had been following his life from afar, assembling these breadcrumbs into some semblance of connection. He had a Google alert set up for your name, Ellie said from the doorway, making Thomas start. Every time you were mentioned anywhere online, he'd get an email. Thomas closed the album gently. How long was he sick? The cancer? About 8 months from diagnosis too. She didn't finish the sentence. He didn't want us to tell you. Said you'd made your choice, and he respected that. I would have come, Thomas said, surprising himself with the truth of it. If I'd known. I think he knew that too. That's why he didn't want us to call. Ellie entered the study, perching on the edge of the desk. He didn't want your return to be about obligation or guilt. Thomas thought about that. About his father protecting him even in his final months, ensuring that when Thomas finally came home, it would be on his own terms. I've been thinking about Dad's request, Ellie continued. About us spending the week here before deciding what to do with the house. And I can't stay in Oak Ridge permanently. My life is in Boston, my job, my friends. She smiled sadly. But I don't want to lose this place either. It's the only home we've ever known. Claire wants to keep it, Thomas guessed. She says she doesn't, but I think she's just tired. Tired of being the only one who stayed, the only one who shouldered the responsibility. Ellie studied him. What about you? Do you want to sell your share? The question was more complicated than it seemed. A week ago, Thomas would have said yes without hesitation. Now, after seeing Jamie again, after learning how his father had changed, he wasn't so sure. I don't know, he admitted. Chicago doesn't feel like home anymore, but neither does Oak Ridge. Maybe home isn't a place, Ellie suggested. Maybe it's the people who know you best, even when you're at your worst. Before Thomas could respond, his phone rang. Jake's name flashed on the screen. I should take this, he told Ellie. It's my son. She nodded and left the study, closing the door behind her. Thomas took a deep breath and answered. Hey, buddy. Mom said you're in Connecticut. Jake's voice had deepened recently, hovering between child and teenager in a way that always caught Thomas off guard. At your dad's funeral? Yeah, I am. I'm sorry I didn't call you. It's fine. The forced casualness in Jake's tone reminded Thomas painfully of himself at that age. I just wanted to make sure you're still coming for 4th of July weekend. Mom already bought tickets for the Cubs game. Thomas had forgotten about the holiday visit, just 3 weeks away. His twice-yearly ritual of awkward outings and strained conversations with a son who was practically a stranger. I'll be there, he promised. Actually, I was thinking, what if we did something different this time? Different how? The wariness in Jake's voice made Thomas wince. My father left me a cabin at a lake in Connecticut. It's about 2 hours from New York. I thought maybe, instead of Chicago, you could come out here. We could go fishing, swimming. Thomas found himself warming to the idea as he spoke. It's where I spent my summers when I was your age. The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Thomas wondered if the call had dropped. Jake? You still there? Yeah. Another pause. Would it just be us? The question carried more weight than its simple words suggested. Would it just be us, without the buffer of Jake's mother to fill awkward silences? Without the distractions of a busy city to hide behind? Yes, Thomas said. Just us. But we could invite your mom too, if you'd prefer. No, Jake said quickly. Just us is okay, I guess. It wasn't enthusiasm, but it was something. An opening. Great. I'll talk to your mom about the details. After they hung up, Thomas sat in his father's chair for a long time, thinking about second chances and whether he deserved one. About cabins and lakes and boys learning to become men without repeating their father's mistakes. He was still sitting there when Claire came home, her arms full of grocery bags. A little help would be nice, she called from the kitchen. Thomas found her unpacking fresh vegetables, a loaf of bread from the local bakery, a bottle of wine. I invited Jamie for dinner, she said without preamble. I hope that's okay. Thomas nearly dropped the tomato he was holding. Tonight? Is that a problem? Claire raised an eyebrow. You two seem to have plenty to talk about last night. You left the reception without telling anyone where you were going, by the way. Sorry about that. Thomas set the tomato down carefully. No, it's not a problem. It's good, actually. I'd like to see him again. Claire's expression softened slightly. He was different after he saw you yesterday. More like the old Jamie. She turned to the refrigerator, arranging ingredients. You know he's never been in a serious relationship? Not in all the years since you left. The revelation hit Thomas with unexpected force. Because of me? Don't flatter yourself. Claire smiled to take the sting from her words. Not directly, anyway. But I think what happened between you two, the accident, you leaving, it left scars. The kind that make it hard to trust people. Thomas thought of his own failed marriage, his distant relationship with Jake, the string of relationships that had fizzled out before they could become meaningful. I know something about that. They worked together in companionable silence for a while, preparing dinner. It felt strange and yet familiar, like muscle memory returning after a long absence. I've been thinking about the house, Thomas said as he chopped onions. About what Dad wanted us to do. Claire's hands stilled over the salad she was assembling. And I think we should keep it, not sell it. He set down the knife, turning to face his sister. I don't mean we should all move back to Oak Ridge. But this house, it matters. To all of us, in different ways. How would that even work? We live in different states. We could timeshare it, for lack of a better term. Use it for holidays, summer vacations. Thomas warmed to the idea as he spoke. I could bring Jake here. You could use it as a break from your apartment. Ellie could write here when she needs quiet. Claire looked skeptical. That sounds complicated. Life is complicated. Family is complicated. Thomas smiled slightly. I'm not suggesting we all hold hands and pretend the past didn't happen. I'm just saying maybe Dad was right. Maybe this house shouldn't belong to strangers. You hated this house, Claire reminded him. You couldn't wait to get away from it. I didn't hate the house. I hated what happened here. Thomas picked up the knife again, resumed chopping. But I'm starting to think running away from painful places doesn't actually help. The pain just follows you. Claire studied him for a long moment, as if seeing him clearly for the first time since his return. You've changed. Not enough, Thomas admitted. Not yet, but I'm trying. The doorbell rang, and Claire wiped her hands on a dish towel. That'll be Jamie. As she went to answer the door, Thomas remained in the kitchen, listening to the murmur of voices in the hallway, to Ellie coming downstairs to join them, to the sounds of a house coming alive with conversation and movement. He thought of his father's letter, asking them to spend a week together before making any decisions. William Mitchell had known what he was doing. He'd understood that some wounds could only begin to heal when you stopped running from them, when you turned and faced them instead, surrounded by the people who shared your history, who knew your failures, and who might, if you were lucky, help you find your way forward. Thomas picked up the bottle of wine and carried it to the dining room, where Jamie was helping Ellie set the table, while Claire arranged flowers in a vase. They all looked up when he entered, their faces open with a cautious warmth that felt like the first light of dawn after a very long night. Perfect timing, Ellie said, taking the wine from him. We were just talking about the cabin. Jamie says the dock needs repairs. Nothing major, Jamie added. Just some weathering over the years. Thomas met his eyes across the table, saw the unspoken question there. Are you staying? Are you running away again? I'll take a look at it this weekend, Thomas said. I promised Jake we'd spend July 4th there. I wanted to be ready. The surprise and approval on their faces was worth any uncertainty he still felt. For the first time in 20 years, Thomas Mitchell was making a choice based not on escape, but on connection, imperfect and fragile as it might be. Outside, evenings settled over Oak Ridge, over the house that had witnessed both the fracturing and the tentative rebuilding of a family. The future remained unwritten, full of complications and potential disappointments. But as Thomas took his place at the table, surrounded by the people who had known him longest and perhaps best, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. The sense of coming home, not to a place, but to the truth of who he was and who he might yet become.